Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Cop out. The New Deal, crafted by world leaders working towards the end of fossil fuels, was passed at lightning speed, a perk of not being subject to scrutiny or accountability. The so-called green agenda does nothing but drive up our energy costs here at home, but it could also have a deleterious effect on the oil-rich Falkland Islands. Nigel, your country needs you. Explosive new polling shows that our very own Nigel Farage's popularity is surging ahead among Tory party voters. Could he be the charismatic figure we need to rescue the Conservatives from the doldrums? Well, shocking new data shows a fifth of the adult population would support an immediate reinstatement of lockdown measures, despite the pandemic being over. Has Project Fear still got its gnarly tentacles wrapped tightly around the British social conscience? If you are one of the said lockdown loons who want to deprive us our freedoms once more, you may prefer not to listen. That's a trigger warning. And the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been party to some rather uncharitable news, as it's revealed their sometimes for-profit Archwell Foundation has seen a substantial plummet in donations of nearly £10 million a year. Has the halo of wokery well and truly slipped from the Montecito magnates? State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my particularly cantankerous panel this evening, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. As always, you know this, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's what you've all been waiting for, the news of the day with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, police searching for a missing mother of three say they're in contact with detectives who worked on the Nicola Bulley case to make sure no stone is unturned. CCTV footage has been released showing the 55-year-old Gaynor Lord leaving work on Friday afternoon. She was last seen walking through Norwich city centre. Her coat has since been discovered in the River Wensum, prompting a huge search by police, fire crews crews and the Coast Guard. Police say she may have entered the water, where underwater teams have been searching today.
We are continuing the work that we have been doing since Friday night here at Wensum Park, conducting searches both on land and in the water. Today we've been joined by a specialist dive team who are in the water now, and they're supporting the search in terms of getting into those deeper parts of the River Wensum, which then obviously supports all of the search work that we've already done here at the river.
Politics now, and Tory infighting was the big focus of today's Christmas-themed Prime Minister's Questions, the final session of the year. 38 rebel Conservative MPs chose last night to abstain from a vote on the Safety of Rwanda bill, but it passed with a majority of 44. The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer accused the government of being in meltdown, but Rishi Sunak hit back, saying numbers on migration and the economy speak for themselves.
Down by a third, and crucially, as we heard from Honourable Friend, tax cuts coming to help working families in the new year.
Mr. Speaker, he can spin it all he likes, but the whole country can see that yet again the Tory party is in meltdown and everyone else is paying the price. Now, he's kicked the can down the road. But in the last week, his MPs have said of him, he's not capable enough, he's inexperienced, he's arrogant, a really bad politician.
Crunch talks between Northern Ireland's main political parties and the government have failed today to reach a conclusion. It's understood the discussions on power sharing and funding will now be extended into next week. It comes after Rishi Sunak told the Commons that he stands ready to legislate to keep Northern Ireland in the UK's internal market, but only if devolved government is restored. The Stormont administration has been effectively collapsed for more than a year and a half. Sinn Féin leader Mary Lou McDonald said the talks have reached a moment of truth. Now, a group of British men have become the first in the world to enter early trials of a new male hormone-free contraceptive pill. 60 years after the female pill was introduced, a group of 16 volunteers will test out the new birth control treatment. The pill, known as YCT529, is a drug that prevents sperm production by blocking access to vitamin A. Scientists hope that if the tests are successful, the daily tablet could balance out the responsibility for contraception between the sexes. If they remember to take it, of course. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
The deal passed off the back of COP28 calls for the transitioning away from fossil fuels in our energy systems, beginning in this decade, in a just, orderly and equitable manner, so as to achieve net zero by 2050. The new compromise calls for transitioning away from fossil fuels rather than a phase-out, despite the demands of more than 100 nations. The UN climate chief, Simon Steele, said that the deal is the beginning of the end for fossil fuels. The deal passed almost immediately, the smoothest most have ever seen a deal go through with no objections raised. Authoritarian agendas have a tendency to pass rather quickly because they're not subject to scrutiny or democratic procedures. World leaders who hopped into their array of carbon-spewing private jets to tell the rest of us we need to use less fuel, proudly declared that this is the first time in almost 30 years of COP climate summits that a fossil fuel agreement has been reached. But there's one major flaw in this plan. It doesn't make sense. We need cheap fuel. It's not expendable, it's essential. Cheap fuel is essential for alleviating poverty, for spreading prosperity, and for promoting economic growth globally. And the climate doomsters may say that economic benefits are unimportant, but that's not right. They are essential. And even the gloomiest forecasts are not talking about Armageddon. The world will continue, and yes, there may be some ameliorations that are needed, but even if the temperature rises, the world will still continue. And what we need is for the market to lead the way in energy advancement. We need the technology to develop first, and then in the immortal principle of supply and demand, take the reins from there. Why is this important? Because as you see how energy has evolved over hundreds and thousands of years, it has always been that economies have grown as energy has got cheaper and more plentiful. And so we need to know what the more plentiful and cheaper energy will be first before we phase out the energy that has been the staple. And this leads on to what's happening in one of Great Britain's last remaining territories, the Falkland Islands. It is rich in oil resources, yet this vital, lucrative and enriching industry is under threat under COP's new fossil fuel agenda, which leaves us dependent on fossil fuels coming from dictatorships. And it's always been part of Britain's territorial deal with the Falklands that they, the Falkland Islanders, should have the ability to economically self-sustain themselves. If His Majesty's government is sincere about honouring this commitment to this territory, it must allow the islanders to develop their own resources. Also, the deal poses a serious risk to all its citizens' well-being over here on the mainland. It'll push up our bills, force us to rely on foreign imports, make green energy that is expensive the mainstay and sometimes unavailable when the wind isn't blowing, and this will cost you, the hard-working citizen, as our economy doesn't grow. As ever, I want to hear from you, mailmog@gbnews.com, but I'm delighted now to be joined by senior meteorologist and social commentator Jim Dale. Jim, thank you very much for coming in. Hello. This deal of phasing out fossil fuels, we're going to be dependent on fossil fuels for a long time to come, realistically.
Yeah, you said phasing out. I think that's the word that got taken out. Transition.
Transitioning, yes.
Yeah, that is the word that has been put into... look, we're in the right place. It's a line in the sand, quite obviously, in terms of going forward. A lot of clapping, a lot of congratulations, but it's talk. And I actually think this is a small step for man, but not necessarily a giant leap for mankind.
But they said 2 years ago at COP26 that they were going to stop coal. And actually, we've seen more coal power stations opened in the last 2 years, particularly in China. And so they say these grandiloquent things, and then countries like the UK go ahead and do them and make ourselves less competitive, and countries like China don't take a blind bit of notice and make themselves more competitive and more prosperous.
Except we're not, because there's a coal mine opening in Cumbria from this government. It's allowing it to happen. The Rosebank oil licences have been awarded again, and therefore it's a step backwards. It's Mr. Sunak sitting on his fence gathering splinters. That's where we are.
But the coal field is to provide coal for domestic industry that is currently importing coal. So that's a perfectly sensible thing to do. It's replacing other supplies. It's not making the UK economy more net dependent on coal, whereas in China they are actively opening, and I believe in Germany as well, they're actively opening coal-powered stations.
But at the same time, they're actually pushing, as well you know, in China, the solar energy side of things is far, far outweighing what's happening in this country, for example.
But solar's interesting, because solar is an area where the technology has advanced to be cost competitive. And that's fine. Nobody like me would argue against something once it's become cost competitive. It's these latest offshore wind contracts that are about double the price of the nuclear contracts.
But I always say we're in a process of evolution, not necessarily revolution. If you take yourself back in the ages, things that we have now that we take for granted, they always start at a very high premium price, and in time they all come down. Everything that you can think about touching.
Yes.
It's that progress when things become, and therefore this transition zone that we're in is going to be at times painful in terms of some of the economic sides. But I should say the economic side is a false argument, because you know, I'm a meteorologist at the end of the day. I chew the numbers, I look at the data, and I see what's going on. So Malaga, for example, yesterday 29.9 degrees in December, beat its old December record by not 0.5 degrees but 5 degrees. Phenomenal. This is the sort of thing that we're seeing, and you take yourself back 2 years, over the last 2 years, and you've seen what's going on in terms of the world, and that's the economic loss. And Deloitte, who you'll know very well, have assessed that in the next 50 years, the cost of doing net nothing means that it's going to be running into literally hundreds of trillions of pounds loss.
But that's extremely speculative against the known cost of trillions of pounds if you actually take these steps until the technology is there. So I agree with you that technology develops and evolves and gets cheaper, but normally people don't implement it until it's already got cheaper. They don't implement it at the expensive stage.
Why do you think COP is existing. I know this is number 28, and obviously number 1, 2 and 3 failed, didn't get where it need to get to. The Paris Agreement several years ago moved the barriers again. This is another moving. We're going in that direction. Why do you think these things exist in the first instance? Why are they happening? I just put that to you, and I don't want me to answer it, I want you to answer it in terms of saying, why is this going on at all? Why are we moving and transitioning from fossil fuels into the renewable energies?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, I think we are doing something that is harmful to our economies, and that we should allow technologies to evolve and then use them as they become cheap and competitive. I'm not in favour of this compulsion that's making the poorest in the world poorer. I think this is a very bad way of making policy.
I'll tell you what makes the poorest poorer is when there is you get into a situation of drought or lack of water or too much water.
Okay, but
of that.
If you take from 1990 to now, you've seen a collapse in absolute poverty globally. You've seen it go down from over half the world to under 10%. You've seen it go down from 1.8 billion people to under 800 million people. And that's with a growing population. What's done this has been cheap energy and trade. That has fundamentally revolutionised the standard of living of the poorest in the world. And yes, you can point to countries that have drought, but you could have done that at any point in history.
No, I think it's... as I said, I'm a meteorologist, and I look at the data and I see what's going on, and that is why COP28 and COP29 next year is going to be meeting, so that we alleviate these problems. You talk about, there's a lot of talk about migration and boats. I tell you what, one of the biggest concerns going forward will be the impact of weather and climate on these countries that are going to leave people in absolute desperate states, and the next trip is to a boat to get across to somewhere that's a bit better.
But so far it's been more, hasn't it? It's been the destabilisation of Syria, the destabilisation of Afghanistan, the destabilisation of Libya. That's not climate-related.
And what comes next? And what comes next? And the reason why we're trying to avert the 1.5, and by the way, we're going to pass 1.5. It'll probably happen in 2024.
But this is... You're on with the scare stories about these things will happen.
It's not scare.
The temperature going up can be ameliorated. You know, the IPCC itself points out there are more deaths from cold than from heat.
No, they're not. That's now globally. That is well, in the UK, in England and Wales, it has now changed, and you've got to. Well,
the IPCC put the figures in, and they point out there were more deaths from cold than from heat.
Yeah, I call that a race to the bottom. That's not where we need to be.
All right, you think it's a race to the bottom, but now, thank you very much, Jim. But to take a look at the Falklands with me is the columnist and former editor of the Daily Telegraph, Lord Moore. Charles, thank you very much for joining me. This seems a very odd situation for the Falklands to be in, which you highlighted in your Telegraph column this morning.
Yes, I think it's very unfortunate, and actually it happened on the British watch because it happened at the COP26 in Glasgow, and agreement was made that we shouldn't help develop international hydrocarbons, and the British government chooses to regard the Falklands in this respect as international. So the government's actually been very helpful to British exploration for oil in the Falklands, but now that it's got to the point of extraction, the possibility of extraction, the government is refusing to give a guarantee, to put a guarantee behind a bond issue, and there needs to be such a guarantee because the Falklands involves political risk, so because of the Argentine threat to the Falklands. So a normal bank will not underwrite such a project, but such a project is there. There's lots of oil there, and it would be logical and beneficial to Britain, by the way, if Falklands oil could be extracted. There's a large amount of it in the Great Sea Line field, but so far they've been saying no.
But this is very odd, isn't it, Charles? Because the government announced that it was going to give more licensing rounds in the North Sea. So clearly the UK mainland counts as domestic, and a territory with whatever it is, about 2,000 British citizens living in it, counts as foreign. That seems a most peculiar differentiation to make.
Yes, and I wonder if... I'm not quite sure what the bureaucratic mind is doing here. It may be that this is they're just worried about political argy-bargy. Sorry, I shouldn't. Argy-bargy is the wrong phrase to use in relation to Argentina. But really, maybe they just think it's a bit too risky politically. But if we had, it would be a secure supply. It would greatly benefit the Falkland Islands. And one of the problems with British oil is that we do not have a national reserve in the way that for oil security in that sense. And that could be very largely provided with the help of Falklands oil. I think it's a real opportunity being missed for both our very loyal overseas territory and for this country.
Because this is really important, that the quantity here is much greater than the quantity that we are likely to get from the new licences in the North Sea because of the long-term depletion of the North Sea.
In the Great Sea Lion alone, field alone, it's thought to be 2.7 billion barrels. I think what's claimed, and I can't claim to be an expert on this, is that if we made full use of Falklands oil, we could halve our net imports of oil.
So this is really important because it's part of the green ideology, isn't it? That basically anything you do which helps your own economy, that uses fossil fuels that you're going to use anyway, is bad, and you should get your fossil fuels from dictatorships and unstable regimes. It's a most peculiar political situation to be in.
The whole thing's very strange. In your earlier discussion you just had with Jim, I think the one thing that got missed in that discussion is that whatever is said at COP doesn't necessarily produce the desired result. So that
the most demanding
Sultan Al Jaber, who's in charge of COP, is of course also the oil minister of UAE, and I don't believe that this communique that finally got put out, or this agreement that finally got put out, is really going to make such countries control their hydrocarbons. So what tends to happen is that the more obedient nations, such as ours, tend to sacrifice our own advantages, and the less obedient ones don't sacrifice them. So Britain and British people tend to suffer from these agreements, and the people who are actually producing far more fossil fuels continue to do so, such as China.
Well, thank you very much, Charles. It's worth pointing out, I was very briefly Energy Secretary, and whilst I did try to push to get the Falkland Islands able to get their oil out, but my special advisors, as were, reminded me that they ran into an awful lot of official obstruction as they tried to do it. There really is a blob that doesn't want us to have energy security. Thank you again, Charles. Coming up, new polling shows Nigel Farage, just back from the jungle, is far more popular than Rishi Sunak among Conservative Party voters. Is this a sign from the heavens that it's time for our Nigel to swoop back into the Tory ranks and raise us once again to greatness?
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GBNews, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's on your teeth.
It's on your teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. We've been discussing COP28 and the green agenda, and you've been sending in your mail mogs. Terry says fracking developed alongside carbon capture is the way forward. If carbon capture can be developed to become commercially viable, it will give fossil fuels a new lease of life. And Stephen, Stephen, you're my new best friend. Jacob is absolutely right. I like mail mogs that say this. We need to know what the alternative fuel is going to be before we get rid of fossil fuels. Well, now we're going to talk about the popularity between Nigel and Rishi, because an intriguing new poll has been published showing that our very own Nigel Farage is considerably more popular among Conservative Party voters than their own leader Rishi Sunak. Pollsters' JL Partners gave Nigel a net popularity score of 18 among those who voted Tory in 2019, while the Prime Minister is at -3 within the same group. Mind you, political popularity does go up and down like the magnificent men in their flying machines. You know, they go up till you're up, they go down till you're down. So perhaps we shouldn't always take too much of this to heart. But Nigel's recent reality TV sting demonstrated to the nation at large that he's apt at surviving in an inhospitable climate. So is it Nigel's time to heroically swoop in and rescue the Conservative Party from a difficult electoral challenge? Well, I'm joined now by my panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. So, Michael, is Nigel Farage the king over the water who can come back and save the Tories, and we will live to fight another day?
Well, being a more popular politician than Rishi Sunak is a bit like being a more trusted doctor than Harold Shipman. I'm not sure
cruel.
how impressive this is. I was just looking at this. So this is among Tory voters, isn't it, where Nigel Farage comes out all right. I mean, Rishi Sunak, among the population in general, 70% of people have an unfavourable opinion of him, compared with 21% who have a favourable opinion. So the fact that you're beating that guy in the polls doesn't necessarily mean you've got a fighting chance of leading a major political
Keir
party.
Starmer, who is much less well-known, is still pretty unpopular. His popularity has been going down, even when the government hasn't exactly been going from success to success. So Labour supporters must be a bit worried about that.
Well, he's going to win by default, isn't he? I mean, I don't think people particularly trust Keir Starmer. He doesn't seem like someone who necessarily keeps to his word. But he's not Rishi Sunak. He's not the party who are having silly, ridiculous Godfather/Star Wars press conferences to vote down their own legislation. All while, I keep saying this, we're going to enter into an NHS winter crisis, I think, like no other. So the Tories are screwed. Labour, leader's not that popular, but Nigel or Sunak, it's still going to be Labour next time.
Kelvin, can Nigel save the day?
No, he can't, because he does not want to join the Conservative Party. He knows that that is a poisoned chalice, and anyway, he doesn't agree with most of the policies. But what happened with him on television was that he emerged as he actually is. And if you're in the green room, or you've known him as I have for 30-odd years, he's exactly the guy. He's quite a quietly spoken guy, and he is not he is not our Trump either, even although he actually gets on well with Trump. He is not our Trump. I suspect that some of the people who really like him would prefer him if he were more right-wing than he is, but he's quite a decent cove, and actually, when you appear on television in front of tens of millions of people, you are going to get a bounce of some kind. Even if you were in the jungle, Jacob, your positive message would go down well.
Well, you're very kind. I'm not tempted to go into the jungle. But what I'm interested in is that if you look at the Tory vote, it's broadly halved since the election. And if you look at where that's gone, a big chunk has gone to staying at home or reform. And it seems to me that that part of it is the easiest part to win back. And that's where Nigel is the most likely to appeal. The ones who've gone to Labour already, I would have thought are very unlikely to come back. The ones who've gone Green, not many, Lib Dem, a few, are hard to win back. But those staying at home or to reform just want conservatism.
Yes, they want something which I don't think Rishi can deliver, right? He is actually a technocrat, you know. If the numbers don't add up, then we aren't doing this. We've got issues in that respect, and so reform stand a spectacular chance of completely depth charging the Conservative Party, because let's guess at it. Come September, late September, Rishi announces November the 14th or whatever. At that, surprise, surprise. Because anyway, he'd be in a little bit of difficulty if he were on a licensed television station. Suddenly, Nigel says, I am going to take over reform for the 6 weeks of the campaign, right? At that, the numbers on reform for those very people who feel disenfranchised right now go from, say, 9, 10 or 11. Suddenly, it goes up to 19 or 20%. Boom! Right? That's all the Conservative Party needed. They needed 20%. People who are naturally minded to vote Conservative, and I'm afraid at the end of that, they get no seats at all. Labour do unbelievably, possibly throwing you out of office in the manner, right, I'm afraid. And then at the end of that, Nigel says, well, I've done my best. Boom, back to GB News. That's how it's all going to work.
Well, I'm not sure whether
they might be kicking you out of this job as well if they tighten up the Ofcom rules on politicians.
That is not true. That is not true.
We'll have to see what I think it'd be very odd for people to say that politicians can't appear on telly. I mean, that's just a bizarre thing.
It's
so undermining freedom of speech, and the number of people who ask me to go on is quite wide. So it'd be odd to do that. But I just want a word of defence of Rishi, because Kelvin said he's a good technocrat. And haven't you seen him actually at his best in front of the COVID inquiry, where he was really on top of his facts? He was pointing to that rather smug KC to say, well, if you turn to page whatever it is, paragraph 3, and I mean, sort of really bold googlies at the KC, making the KC look as if he wasn't such a fine batsman after all. And he's a highly competent, good, hard-working, intelligent man.
Potentially. I mean, no one's watching the COVID inquiry because it's incredibly dull. So I don't think that's necessarily going to help. I mean, I think Rishi Sunak made some real mistakes during COVID. So I think one of them was to not pay people to stay at home if they were sick. So I think Sage were asking for a very long time. If we want to stop people spreading the virus and without sort of the most severe restrictions imaginable, what we want to do is encourage people to stay at home if they've tested positive for COVID. And they were saying for ages that involves increasing statutory sick pay. As far as I understand it, Rishi Sunak was always very against that. I suppose he thought that would change incentives or the like.
I know you come from the left and everything. Where do you think money comes from? It looks as though it's going to cost us. The reason we have inflation today, somewhere like 300 to 400 billion pounds. And if we did what you suggested, I imagine everybody would then claim that they were sick with the damn stuff, and that number would have gone up by another 200 billion.
Well, we have very low statutory sick pay compared to most other countries in Europe. But it's not the case that in those countries everyone's just calling in sick all the time.
But that's the problem for the Treasury, is that if they had increased it for COVID, they'd never have brought it back down again, because if you look at anything they did, it was very hard to reverse unless it was purely COVID. So furlough was purely COVID and you had to stay at home. So why the rules were so tight on furlough, so that you didn't have people being subsidised to be in work. anything you increase is very hard in terms of benefit to decrease again.
Well, this is precisely the argument that we were making all the time on my show, on Novara Media, which is there were many things actually that we started doing during COVID-19. Now, of course, not lockdowns. No one wants a goddamn lockdown again.
A lot of people do.
But
we're discussing that next.
Actually, we are going to talk about that next. A surprising number of people do seem to want that again.
They do.
But lots of things which were good. You know, we ended homelessness for a little while.
Oh, yes.
And we were hoping that maybe people would realise, oh, the state can do a little bit more to wrap their arms around people. And I think you saw a real panic towards the end, whereby your party were thinking, oh, we can't get people expecting that we can end homelessness anymore. And I think that was a real mistake.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. I wish we had time to discuss that, and one person who was very good on it was actually Robert Jenrick. But thank you to my panel. Coming up, a fifth of adults in the UK would support another lockdown now, according to new research. When will Project Fear end? And is the Duke and Duchess of Sussexes plan to cash in on their celebrity status in the United States backfiring, or are we being too harsh on them?
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your mail mogs. Alan says, Rishi needs to go to the jungle and perhaps remain there until the next election. It may be the Conservatives' only hope. Alan, you're a cruel and hard man. Tony says, why should Nigel trust the Conservative Party when the majority of the nation doesn't? Surely not. Surely not. Shocking new statistics have been published suggesting a fifth, that's 20%, 60% of UK adults would support an immediate reinstatement of draconian lockdown measures, despite all the evidence pointing to the pandemic being over. Now, this show loves freedom in all its forms, so if you are one of those lockdown lovies who want the state to run your life, I think you should turn this programme off immediately. I would encourage you to do this because the programme will be too upsetting for you. And in the woke phrase, this is a trigger warning for those of you who like lockdowns. The earlier lockdowns damaged our economy, our children's education, our status in the world, our mental and physical health, not to mention abandoning precious liberties in the forlorn hope that the government knew best. The one thing that the biased inquiry is showing is that the government did not know best. Is this desire to be locked down a version of Stockholm Syndrome in itself, a malign consequence of earlier lockdowns? Well, my panel's still with me, Kelvin Mackenzie and Michael Walker. Kelvin, I'm challenging my inner Kelvin Mackenzie by basically saying people who believe in lockdowns are not going to watch this.
No, they shouldn't watch it, and thank you very much for sparing your time, and good night. So 20% to me is quite a number. Actually, in some ways, people can dismiss it and say they're just mad and all the rest of it. One of the things I noticed on the London Underground is the number of people still wearing a mask, which was not a thing prior to the pandemic, right? And I am so there are people out there who are fearful. Either they do have a health issue and they think they should be saving themselves from the potential of a COVID, or that they have become, how can I put it, it's very fashionable, have some mental health aspect to their lives, which they believe that COVID has given to them.
Yes, and with this mask wearing, it's ineffective anyway, isn't it? I thought they had finally, having wavered around, and this is where the inquiry gets in such difficulties. The scientists said masks were ineffective, they were effective, they were ineffective. Hasn't it now been decided they were, in fact, ineffective?
Yes, not completely hopeless, because it could mean that you could stand further away from somebody. But the idea that if you had it and I was wearing a mask and you were sitting right there, I had just the same chance as if I wasn't wearing a mask.
I mean, I think on the scientific question, it all depended on the kind of mask. So if you had a sort of high-quality fitted mask, then that would stop you both getting it and passing it on.
One that Baroness Moan might have had, do you mean?
Oh, the ones that we all had to burn because they weren't quite suitable.
Or if you had a gas mask that you'd kept from the Second World War, you were probably going to be all right.
That would work as well. I think they were called N95 masks. I think if you wear one of those and it's relatively fitted, you'll be OK. I mean, when it comes to people on the tube, I don't wear one because I tend to do whatever the majority is doing. I follow the crowd like that. But I was kind of hoping during the pandemic that we might move to a more kind of East Asian way of dealing with flus in the winter. Because it is the case, it's not the case that everyone in Japan has a mental health problem. They, when it gets to the winter, realise that we could all have flu a bit less if when we go on very, very busy public trains, we wear a face mask.
Is there any sign, I don't know the stats on this, and perhaps your audience will do, is there any sign that people in Japan get less flu than the people who travel in London get? Since they're actually all crammed in, they actually have people whose job it is to shove you in.
It's a good question. I did have a friend in sort of Italy who was saying that they have more of a, you don't go into work when you're sick, and they do get sick a lot less. Apparently people from other countries do come here and think, God, you guys are sick all the time. But I don't know, we need to look at the paper.
NHS, they're sick.
But it's the other things. If you go beyond the face mask, some people were wanting to close down nightclubs. Now, you may want to close down nightclubs anyway, because they're pretty ghastly places, but I'm happy for other people to go as long as they don't force me along, and to go back to the restrictions of making people be at home. This is just weird, isn't it?
Could it also be that people rather enjoyed the idea of your employer effectively paying either you or the taxpayer, the government, paying you 80% of your income for sitting around doing bugger all again for another 18 months. I suspect there's a lot of that. After all, we can't find workers in our country to go to work, right? They're all at home claiming they're sick all the time, and this is the reason why we've ended up with hundreds of thousands of people come from all around the world.
Kelvin, you're creating this extraordinary world where all the people who are sick go into work and make us ill, and all the people who aren't sick stay at home malingering. Come on, Michael, defend the great British worker.
I mean, I think British people work very hard. I'm a bit more patriotic than you, perhaps.
Oh, right.
When it comes to this particular question, I mean, I think one thing it potentially points to is that you know, the COVID experience was very different for different people. So for a lot of people, being locked down had a significant effect on their mental health, destroyed lots of people's mental health and lots of people's livelihoods. For other people, the chance to sort of not have the pressure of going out, to have a bit more time to think, to spend a bit more time with your family, perhaps, was not bad. So it's very difficult coming out of this sort of, we think of it as a collective trauma, but our experience of COVID was all so different. I should say, one thing I always get very disappointed about when it comes to COVID is how throughout it really felt like we as a society were saying essential workers matter, doctors matter, shelf stackers matter. When this is all over, we are going to appreciate you. What happened? Within a year, we had the Tories saying, these greedy teachers, these greedy doctors, how dare they want to get paid well?
The shelf stackers have just had a pay rise to $11.44.
Yeah, the private sector's not doing as bad as the public sector.
$11.44 an hour.
And HGV drivers have had a big pay rise.
Have been offered 11%, right? And they're still saying, I'll tell you what, we're still not going to treat your mother. Let her die. Don't try and say the doctors.
And the HGV drivers have a huge pay rise, and we're now finding HGV drivers locally rather than importing them. There's been a real change in that market.
I don't really like the phrase importing when it comes to people, but anyway, I take your point.
It's import and export, even when it's people. I don't think there's any opprobrium in the word import.
But well, it's a bit objectifying, isn't it? I mean, people choose to come here to work if the wages are decent, and you know, when it comes to the social care system, that's propping up.
I thought it was an absolutely fantastic thing that the government did by raising basic pay to $11.44. Minimum pay. I was absolutely astonished. And what I do notice, because obviously I read the finance pages all the time, all the small-time employees, including, by the way, the publican who's coming on later on to Patrick's show, right, is saying, oh, well, that was very good. He said, that cost me 300 quid a week. Where am I going to do that? I'm going to stick the prices up. So there is a price to be paid for everything. But to try and paint this government as nasty and horrible to the people at the bottom is simply not true.
For public sector workers, yes, I think. I mean, they have squeezed their pay over a decade, right?
No individuals pay.
What do you mean no individuals
Any individual has had pay rises over the last 13 years who was working in the public sector 13 years ago.
Do you mean real pay rises or nominal?
I mean real pay rises for real individuals.
But what I mean is, are you accounting for inflation, or are you just saying that people,
where it's been squeezed is for people who weren't working for public sector and have joined. So you get less than somebody might have been paid before you.
Yeah.
But anyone who was working in 2010, almost anybody, will have a real terms better pay than they had. But then, you're talking about they've got increments, they've got promotions, and it's very misleading, I think, to say that public sector workers have lost out. And public sector pay compared to the private sector
very misleading, because
is highly competitive.
But what you're talking about, so obviously when you go into, say, the NHS, for example, your starting salary, especially as a doctor, is fairly low. Now, it can be the case that you could have frozen wages completely, and the average junior doctor would end up earning more after 10 years, wouldn't they, because they got the pay scale. So to say, well, most of them have gone up the pay scale anyway, so the fact that we sort of cut what a level 10 or a grade 9 gets doesn't really matter.
But they're better paid than other professions. We've been through this time and again. Kelvin, I'll give you a very final quick word.
I'm just saying that junior doctors is a total misnomer. They make up to nearly 100 grand now. All right, you be a registrar, but they're doing fine. Once you reached about 32, 33, you're the highest paid in the public sector, bar none.
OK, thank you, Kelvin, and thank you to Michael as well. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex ending the year with more negative press. Is their plan to cash in on their celebrity status in the United States backfiring, or are we being too harsh on them?
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, Nigel Farage is back in Britain. The jungle hero returns and he means business. And his popularity is soaring above Rishi Sunak. Would you vote for Nigel to be Prime Minister? Plus, I'll be joined by influential Tory rebel Sir John Hayes. Did the five families bottle it last night in the Rwanda vote? Angela Levin has the latest Harry and Meghan drama. They've been named the biggest losers in Hollywood. And we'll bring you the most exciting pay-per-view anywhere on the telly. Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. Be there.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing the shocking revelation that a fifth of the adult population would support another lockdown. And this is what you've had to say. George, absolutely not to another lockdown. One needs to consider mental health and the devastating impact it had on so many who couldn't partake in the activities that they rely on. And Claire, another lockdown would ease pressure on the NHS and would take cars off the road. Oh, Claire, for heaven's sake, we don't run the country for the NHS, please. Anyway, I'm always grateful for male mogs, particularly actually when I disagree. It's fun. Once again, the dynamic duo, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, hit the headlines, and not for particularly favourable reasons, you may be surprised to hear. Not only has the Hollywood Reporter named them amongst 2023's biggest losers for, I quote, that whiny Netflix documentary, whiny biography, and inert podcast, but it has now been revealed that their charity, the Archwell Foundation, has this year seen a drop of £8.7 million in its donations compared to its first year. The non-profit organisation, who claims that its core philosophy is quite simply to do good, reported a loss of over £536,000 because of a lack of donations. Its revenue was £1.6 million, but this was nullified by its cost of £2.13 million. Now, with all this negative press, I thought it only fair to welcome a friend of this programme to fight the Sussexes corner. And having been privy to the upcoming episodes of The Crown that premieres on Netflix tomorrow, maybe even offer us a spoiler, historian author Dr. Tessa Dunlop. Come on, Tessa.
Yes, I split from my Christmas party because when I read the differing headlines on the financial fortunes of the Archwell Foundation, I thought there is no one who will sympathise with them more than Jacob Rees-Mogg. Because actually, you can take the line from the BBC, $1.2 million of donations were made by the Archwell Trust to good causes that even you couldn't complain about. Halo, that's minefields, Afghan women, etc. So all very laudable. Then when you dig around, yes, they gave away more money than they received. Positively charitable, you could argue. The big issue is that they received a giant donation a year or so ago, over £7 million. the equivalent of which they haven't since received. But we all know that wealth begets wealth, and therefore they're not in the red. Actually, their assets have gone from $8 million to $11 million, and people are criticising because they paid James Holt, who manages this money, over £100,000. And now it's when I throw it to you, because as somebody who was a founding member of Somerset Capital, and they lost their leading client, and therefore folded, I'm sure you will understand that one year you get a big client, and the next year you don't.
Well, no, it's very different, because investment management is not a charity.
No.
One thing investment management is definitely not. And the costs seem to be quite high. There seems quite a lot of administrative cost in this foundation.
But this is what I wanted to pursue. If you've got a foundation of $11 million, that requires considerable management. Is it so outrageous that James Holt gets £100,000?
Well, the issue here is proportionality, that if in 1 year, I think this year they got $2 million of donations, if your running costs for $2 million are about 10% of the money that's coming in, that's quite high. And therefore, why not make the donation directly, if you want to be charitable, to the charity underlying, because you have two layers of administration, don't you? You have the administration of this foundation and then the administration of something like Halo, and this just stops money getting through to charities directly.
Indeed, but you can bet your bottom dollar Halo has been name-checked more times today than it has on all 364 days of the year, and we know that charity is about press, it's about traction, so arguably Halo, and therefore the cause of Unexploded Minds, has done very well, thank you very much, courtesy of the Harry and Meghan juggernaut.
So it's actually buying publicity, which is not a bad thing to do.
Partly it is.
Free advertising.
Why else wouldn't you invest in them? Because they are massive. And what I wanted to dig into also with you, because you do represent the right, love it or loathe it, why it is they've caused such existential angst on the right of the British public opinion. They're emigres, they've left the country. All the right wants to do is crush down on people who want to marry foreign spouses, crush down on numbers coming in. They left. They're the most wonderful advert for leaving, and you hammer them night and day.
Not at all. I wish them well.
No, but you as in the right, as in the...
I don't know.
Is this anomalous? Are you actually a fan?
I think the British people are disenchanted, who absolutely love them. That's what the opinion polls show. I don't think it's party political for once, but unfortunately, we have got to move on to something that is robot-eggly brilliant, an elegant, exciting example of excellent engineering. Well, that's how, without over-egging the pudding, you could describe that well-known good egg, Elon Musk's brand new Tesla robot, named Optimus 2. The robot has been expertly built to look like a human. It has moving fingers, can walk, and has even been designed to squat. Not only can Optimus emulate a real person, but it can also boil an egg, which is actually more than I can do. Optimus 2 works at express speeds, 30 times faster than any robot before it, and at just under 6 feet tall, the bot with long legs and knee joints is an exquisite prospect for Musk. He thinks Optimus is more significant than Tesla's electric car, but then he's often an exuberant exponent of his own expertise, and I hope no one poaches his idea. Well, thank you very much to Tessa. Forgive me for my eccentric puns. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, you're not going to be talking about eggs on your bill of fare tonight, are you?
Absolutely not, although that was excellent. I think you did that one, though. Anyway, right, OK, so look, I'm going to be talking about whether or not it would just be easier for us to turn the boats back as opposed to going through this Rwanda malarkey now. Nigel Farage is back, Sunak's popularity is plummeting, would he make a good PM? There's loads on the agenda tonight. You're just going to have to tune in and find out, because we are bang out of time, Jacob.
Oh, well, that's a great pity, but your programme will be as exciting as always. This is all from me. I'm back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and you know the weather in Somerset will be fantabulous.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News forecast. Turning chilly for a time this evening, but then mild air spreads back in overnight as cloud and rain moves in from the Atlantic. This weather front pushes southeastwards as we head through tonight and into Thursday, and then a north-south split into the weekend. High pressure keeping it dry in the south. This evening turning quite chilly, some frost out there, but overnight we see cloud and rain moving in from the Atlantic. This slowly pushing its way southeastward, so temperatures rising as the night goes on, taking us into Thursday morning. Most places frost-free, generally between